Welcome, everybody. I'm Barry Craig, the President Vice Chancellor of Huron University, and delighted to welcome everybody today to our third Spark Speaker Series event. This is a wonderful way, as we come to the very end of our academic year, to finish up with a bang, to have a really outstanding panel to be able to talk to you about. Now, this is a trivia question I'm going to put to you, and by the time, another year or two goes by, I expect a high percentage of positive responses. What's SPARK even stand for? Well, it's to stimulate possibilities, awareness, resilience, and knowledge. This is part of the Nation Builder program, which was sponsored by the Schulich Foundation, and we're coming now to the end of the first year of the Nation Builder program, and from my perspective as president, it's been a tremendous success. Wonderful group of outstanding students who have come together in the first cohort, who are very involved, very engaged, and engaged in the kinds of questions and issues that we had hoped that this program would deliver for our students. And so I think as we go forward in coming years, it's only going to continue to grow as an integral part of what we do here at Huron. The speaker series is intended to bring highly successful, recognizable people and speakers to campus who will spark curiosity across the student community and invite us to think more deeply about important issues in public life. And so today is no exception. We're delighted to have an outstanding panel. Our moderator for today is going to be Dr. Kate Graham. Doesn't need a lot of introduction to most of you. Kate's a professor here at Huron in political science, Moss, and the GLE program. And Kate's able to use her real-world experience in politics and local government and policy and a hands-on approach to inspire curiosity in her class. Kate was recognized in 2025 with the Ontario Undergraduate Student Alliance's Teaching Excellence Award. And for those of you who don't understand that, that's a teaching award that's voted on by students across Ontario. It's not something the admin picks, but by students, and I think that's a measure of Kate's success in the classroom. And as guest speakers today, we have two, and they'll be joining Kate on stage as part of a sort of fireside chat and panel. Gillian Riley first. Gillian, a very experienced senior person in the banking industry with Scotiabank for over 3 decades. And from 2018 to 2024, she was president and CEO of its subsidiary Tangerine Bank. She also founded Scotiabank Women's Initiative to strengthen equality and support women entrepreneurs. Gillian's been awarded and recognized for a commitment to advancing gender equality in the corporate world, championing fearlessly entrepreneurs and innovation. Now, Gillian graduated from Western, but she has close ties to Huron. Her husband and brother both attended here, and so she's really part of the Huron family now, and in fact sits on our board of governors. Also, we have with us Anique Asher, who brings also a couple of decades of senior leadership experience in cross-finance and strategy, investor relations, capital management. In December 25, she was appointed Executive Vice President, Real Estate Secured Lending at Scotiabank. In that role, she oversees the bank's mortgage lending business in Canada, which is pretty critical, as you can imagine, client primacy, sustainable, profitable growth. She's also served as Chief Strategy Officer and Chief Operating Officer at Scotiabank. She represents Scotiabank on the board of directors of the Canadian Bankers Association and on the board of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Toronto. More importantly, she's also the parent of a current Huron student, so another part of the Huron family. When we have speakers like Gillian and Anique with us, the shiny part is obviously the titles. They've come to the very top of the banking industry in Canada, which is such a crucial industry for our country. But the reason they're here today is not just because of those titles. If that's all it was, we could find a number of people that could fill the role. The reason they're here today is their professional accomplishment, plus the fact they're great human beings. I count them both as my friends, and I would include Kate in that category, as people that have seen that if they're successful in life, that actually gives them an opportunity to help make society better, not simply pursue their own agenda. And I think that's what you're going to find today is an engaged group of women leaders who are making our country better, society better, as well as showing what's possible for all of you in leadership. And so I'll welcome Kate, Anique, and Gillian to come to the stage.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Craig. Thank you, Barry, for those introductions, and welcome to both of you. I have been counting down the days for the chance for us to just sit and talk. I feel like we're going to learn a lot from both of you today, and true to the ethos of the Spark series, I suspect you will spark great inspiration for many in the room today, so thank you for being here. So let's begin with a question that maybe asks you to look a bit back in time. At one point you were sitting here, you were university students. I don't know if that feels like just yesterday or a while ago, but I'm wondering if you could tell us about a key decision that you made that led from being a university student to the place you are today. And Anique, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. First, good morning, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Barry, for that very kind introduction. It doesn't even sound like me when you talk about that. So I think for me, there's not one key event that I would say was a pivotal moment. You know, I came to Canada when I was 18. I had never seen snow. I had never really been outside of the Caribbean, which is where I grew up. And I came to Canada to go to school and came to Weston. I lived in Saugeen, so that'll give you a perspective of where I started. And my mom had her 75-year-old friend help me buy all my winter clothes. And so you can imagine the first day it snowed, which I still remember, was November 3rd, 1995. So you can calculate how old I am now. Because I'd never seen snow, right? First time I snowed, I put all my clothes on, I was ready to go out the door. And my roommate took one look at me and she said, "You cannot live with me and dress like that." So, I had, if you could think about your quintessential ugly sweater, that's what I had on. I had, bunnies and buttons, and that's what happens when a 75-year-old person helps you buy clothes. So, no offense to anyone who might be older than that now. But, what I would say is that, then I went to Ivy, and there was no AEO at that time, and so I went into my first year, and I felt incredibly out of place. I remember calling home in the first week or so and saying, "I've made the worst decision of my life. Everyone here is smarter than me, is brighter than me, they have their act together, I shouldn't be here." And then you fast forward to my first job in Toronto, right in my third year, and I moved into Toronto. I'd never been, the tallest building I'd ever been into at that point was 4 or 5 stories. My office was on the 63rd floor. I'd never taken a subway. I didn't know how to navigate. And the reason why I'm telling you all of these stories is because one of those things that you see in all of those is I was unprepared, I was uncomfortable, but I found a way through. I found a path through, and it's those small moments throughout your career, throughout your life, that help you realize that you are resilient, that you can find ways through things that sometimes seem very difficult, things that sometimes seem that they're unattainable, that you might not feel prepared for because you don't feel as smart as everybody else, or you don't feel as prepared as everybody else. And I guess what I would tell you, my experience is in those sometimes growth is really disguised in discomfort. And that discomfort is where I think I had most of my growth opportunities, which really helped me propel my career.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Gillian.
So good afternoon to everyone, and Barry and team, thank you so much for hosting us, and I'm delighted to be here with my friend Anique, my colleague. So I too, I don't think Anique and I even knew this about each other, but I also lived in Saugeen, Maitland. And at the time, the David Letterman show called it the craziest place in North America to live in. So I lived on the top floor, though, luckily, which was called the penthouse at the time, so I didn't have to go out for all the fire drills that went off every weekend. I hope that doesn't happen anymore. So when I think about the question and my sort of pivotal point, I didn't know what I wanted to do either, particularly, and I graduated a bit earlier in 1989 from Western, And the economy wasn't great. Interest rates were, I think, like 12%. It was a tough time in the economy. And I got a job in the summer working in London in the UK at a bank branch called Lloyds Bank. And I worked there and I thought, wow, like you're actually really helping people be financially better off. And you're actually in a role where you can kind of make a difference. So I thought, this banking thing is kind of interesting. And so and my father was banking, really? And so I applied to several different banks. And I actually got hired at one of the banks. And I have never looked back. I mean, I think I worked with somebody who once said banking is kind of a calling. It's one of the most important parts of society. It started, back in when there was societies just setting out. They had to figure out how to exchange and barter things. The basis of banking is a key part of our economy. And so I felt like it was something that was important and where I could have impact and give back in a meaningful way. And there's a lot of interesting things in banking, but most of all, I think there's so much opportunity and there's lots of diverse. I was very lucky. I moved around Scotiabank in so many different jobs. The idea that there was not the same thing, but the opportunity to continue learning and giving back and having impact. And the last thing I would say is being passionate about what you're doing is probably the most important thing. And for me, I felt like this was something that was going to be a passion. And so I've always sort of carried that with me, and that sort of guided me in my career. But I really didn't know in the beginning what I was going to set out to do.
Well, thank you both. And I suspect it feels a bit like a hug to hear this. There's a lot of pressure on young people to have all the answers, have it all figured out, know exactly where it's going to end, and learning that, a summer job or winter attire and the growth that can come from being uncomfortable can be really powerful things. So thank you for sharing that. My next question is about leadership, which is really central to what we do here, leading with heart. You see it when you drive into the building. We talk about this a lot. I'd love to hear a few thoughts from each of you about leadership, your approach to leading, and maybe if there's something that's helped that approach evolve over time, that would be great to hear too. And Gillian, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So when I first started leading people, my boss at the time said to me something that always stuck with me. He said, leadership is not about a title or a designation, but it's really about the ability to influence, inspire, and motivate people to come together for a common vision. And I thought, interesting. Okay, so I need to inspire, and I need to motivate, and I need to get people behind a common vision. And I thought, what does that all mean? What do I have to do to build my leadership? And so what I built, important for my ethos, number one was about integrity. So I felt it was really important to build trust with people. And I would say throughout my entire career, that's stuck with me, that piece about integrity. So how do you build trust with people? How do you be honest and fair and upfront about things? And I felt that was really important at all times. And so I think people would describe me as someone who has a lot of integrity in what they do. And that was, for me, a real cornerstone for my leadership. And it stuck with me throughout. And a second key thing was about communication. So if you need to inspire people and motivate them and build a common vision, you really need to learn how to communicate properly with all different types of people. And something for me that was important was communicating the same way with everyone. Being consistent in communication, saying the same thing with your bosses, the people who worked with you, the people who worked for you. And I really felt strongly about that point because I didn't want to be a different person with my bosses than I was with the people who worked with me. So I learned to communicate in a very consistent way. But I also felt that communication was about listening. And that one came a bit later. I learned later that active listening and really hearing what people have to say, how you communicate, does build that common vision. So pausing, staying calm, and being true to what you believe in, but listening to others' point of view, and maybe changing your mind. Not always easy, but that to me was all part of communication. And then the final point, which is in your spark, is about resiliency. Right? Sometimes things don't go the way you want them to. And learning from failure and picking yourself up and having that courage to continue on. Believe me, it wasn't always easy, and there are times when you want to bury yourself in the sand or never go to work again, but you have to have that courage and that resiliency to fluff it off and move on, hold your head high, work with the teams that you work with the people around you, always have those that support you to really be resilient. And I think that, I think in today's day and age, more than any time in the last 100 years, this piece about resiliency, we've seen more black swan events than we've seen, you know, in 20 years than we've seen probably in 100 years. So I think this resiliency point in leadership is super critical, and I'm glad to hear it's part of the Spark series. But for me, about integrity, communication, and resiliency as sort of key qualities, there's a lot of others, but those were things that stood by me in my ethos that I learned and developed. I didn't have that all at the beginning, but I learned that over the years, and I think it was helpful in informing me as a person, and I think that those are descriptions that people might describe me as too.
You know, I've had the opportunity to work with Gillian for a very long time, and I would say those are all characteristics that I would use to describe. You know, for me, I would say coming out of school, when you're at school and you're a student, the things that you think about is you're trying to be the smartest person in the room, or at least you're trying to do well at school, right? And you're doing a lot of work, and you're trying to make sure that you keep up with your work, and you do that. Then you get into the real world, and you take a lot of that with you, in that you try to be the smartest person in the room when you go into those meetings in your first job, and you're doing all the work. And you know, I remember the first time that I was in a leadership position, I had just started, and I was in an investment banking job at the time, so you had a very small team, and I finally had people that I had the opportunity to lead, and you do a review. So, you know, when you're done your project, your opportunity is you do a review to the person that's on your team. And so I was sitting in this meeting, and I was doing this review with this individual that I was working with, and they tell you, as a good leader, you should ask for feedback too. I didn't really want the feedback, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to ask. Nobody in my family says I'm good at taking feedback, but I've gotten better. And so I said, you know, what feedback do you have for me, given that we just completed this project? And I'll never forget, you know, what he said to me at that point, and this was, you know, I was 25 or 26, is you have to stop saving me and you have to start trusting me. And what he meant by that is that I would jump in if there was an issue or a problem, and I would do the work, and I would be the one. And he's like, you're not giving me the space. And that was probably the best advice that I got, and I got it early in my career, because I realized that at that point, leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It wasn't about doing all the work. And it was about finding that pivot that my job is to ask good questions in that room. My job is to make sure that we have the right team of people, and making that team feel that they can bring their best self to work, that they feel comfortable in that environment. We talk a lot about psychological safety and creating a room where people feel that they can bring that voice in. So if I'm sitting in a room of leaders, sometimes I'll ask the first-year associate that's there, you know, is there anything you think we missed? Is there anything you'd like to add? And that gives them the opportunity to bring their voice into the room. And 99% of the time, they have something really important to add. I'd also say that it's not without challenges. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Sometimes even when you give people space and you do the things that you need to do to make them feel included, they're not the right person to be on the team, and you have to give them that feedback. And so much we think about leadership is you want to make everybody happy, and you want to make sure that, you know, everyone's feeling good about what they're doing. Yeah, but like Gillian said, sometimes that's a difficult conversation. And what that individual did for me at that time was, you know, put that honest mirror up for me for something that I was not doing right. And that created an awareness in myself to say I needed to change. And that helped me be a better leader. And so you think about that as you get into those roles yourself. It's about not only giving feedback, it's asking for feedback. It's about creating an environment where people feel that they can bring their thoughts and ideas into the conversation, and making people feel comfortable enough to be able to do that would be, you know, some of the key points that I've learned and how my style has developed over the last couple of years.
Great. Well, thanks to you both, and I really appreciate the practical dimension to what you're saying. These are things we can practice all the time and probably become even more important as we take on roles of greater significance. Let's talk about AI. So this is a hot topic here. It's certainly a big topic in post-secondary. It's also a big topic in financial institutions. Maybe you could give us a peek behind the curtain. Tell us a little bit about AI innovation responsible AI innovation. What does this look like from your perspective? And Anique, let's start with you.
Sure, I get asked this question a lot, and I ran our AI function for the bank in my last role. So this is something that's very close to my heart. The first thing I hear when I talk about AI is that, well, it's going to take all the first-year jobs, and no one's going to be able to get a job coming out of school. And I'm here to tell you that we hired the same number of first-year students this year that we've hired every year. So it's not disappearing. It doesn't mean that you're not going to.
Everyone's happy to hear this. Yes.
Good news.
Lots of smiles.
Happy days.
But your job is going to be different. And the way that you do your job is going to be different. And I think that's the important thing. If you did the job where all you had to do was take the number from this spreadsheet and put it into this spreadsheet, you're not going to do that anymore. And when I think about AI and responsible AI, I think of it in a couple of dimensions. I think about it in my own day-to-day and how do I use it. And there's not a facet of my day where I don't think that I'm using some form of AI to help me do my job. First thing I do in the morning is I use my agent to look at, tell me all the important emails that I need to respond to and draft those responses to me very quickly so that I have a starting point for that discussion. Every presentation I'm looking at and the volume of the work that I'm doing is being triaged and reviewed to do that. So my personal productivity is improved because of the tools that I have available for me. And I use multiple tools, and sometimes I use tools to check other tools. And that's important as well as we talk about responsible AI. I think about how the bank is using it for making our employees' life easier and some of the mundane tasks that we would do. If you think about getting a mortgage, there's a lot of back-end processes about checking information, about assessing reasonability, to be able to do that, to about adjudicating what that looks like. So, if you submit a form and you say you make $10,000, then we have agents that can check that now. And there's a reasonability that said, you graduated in 2000 and 2025, well, do you really, is it likely that you're making $10,000 a month or not? And so it allows that sort of reasonability. It listens in to our collection calls for our clients, and it gives our collection agent prompts, things you should have said. You didn't have enough empathy. You didn't talk about this in the right way. And so there are multiple use cases that are in place. And we're also thinking about how do we use it for our clients. And we're just about to start our first client-facing AI use case, where you'll be able to call our call center, and depending on what you want to solve for, you might never speak to a human, and that you're able to do that fully front to back by using some of the agentic teams that we're using. So what does that mean from a responsibility perspective? I think there are a couple of things that are really important. Is using a tool doesn't mean you abdicate the judgment. And so explainability is important. You don't get to say at the end of this, well, the tool told me to do that. That's the decision that I made. The human element of that is the most important piece. And so the tool allows you to take some of these easy things out of the picture, but on the edges, that's where the human judgment is very important. The data. For us, your data as our clients has to be easy to trust, easy to find, easy to use. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping that data safe, that we're respecting your privacy, that we're not using that data in a way that it can harm you, that it can provide additional information, that you do not want that to be there. And that's a big piece of how we think about the responsibility of that. So governance. What governance does the bank have in place? What governance do our regulators want us to have in place to make sure that we're treating that in the right way? And the last piece is the ethics. There's a lot, like every technology, you can use it for bad or you can use it for good. And how do you bring an ethical perspective to that to make sure that how we're doing that is using it for good? When I think about technology, when I came to university, and this is really going to date me, but the internet was starting to evolve, email was starting to evolve, and everyone thought, well, this is going to take everybody's jobs now. Now no one's going to be able to, because this is going to be all different. Fast forward 25 years from now, you'll be sitting here talking about the early onset of AI and what that meant as you're having these conversations with first-year students. But things like digital media, digital marketing, e-commerce, e-payments, content creation, social media influencers, that wouldn't have existed without the onset of that technology at that time. And I think you're just going to see new jobs be created with the advent of AI and what we can do with that will likely make what you come out of school doing much more interesting than what you would have maybe when I was coming out of school.
That was an excellent answer, Anique, and most of what I would have said was in that answer. So I'm going to go with something a bit different, actually, not in my notes here, but first of all, in financial services, it's probably one of the industries that needs the most oversight, governance, as Anique suggested, because the data that banks hold is your personal information that you do not want to be shared with anyone. So protecting that data is super important, and getting it right in financial services is a paramount importance of all the industries that are out there. But I do think, so you talked about explainability, but I'll go one step further, this human in the loop thing that they talk about in AI, and the opportunity for humans to be able to explain what AI is doing and what it has done, I still think will continue to be important. I think AI is changing, this is even bigger than the internet, I think, this is my own opinion, and I do think the changes that we're going to see are going to be, we're all going to have our own agents, and our agents are going to talk to each other, and who knows what they'll talk about, and so on. You'll probably buy your financial services and your investments through an agent and agent to agent. But I think the human side of it will continue to be important. And I think what's going to be important is this leading with empathy and understanding people, even more so as AI becomes at the forefront. So there's this 70-30 thing that you might hear about, where 70% AI, 30% will be human-oriented, and I think those that are going to really do well in leadership are those that understand how to work with people, with AI, and create that common ground and that vision. So when I say lead with having empathy in leadership, it isn't about being really nice to everybody. It's about being fair. It's about being consistent. But it's about knowing the people you work with and how to bring the best out of them and spend time with them in the face of AI becoming really important. So I think more importantly, that will swing even further, that this need to really understand what's going on around you and bring that type of leadership to the forefront to be successful in a large company or in a small company, with AI taking over so much of what goes on, will be paramount. And that's, kind of a view that I have. So I would spend some time on that empathetic leadership style and figuring out how that works with the AI over what goes on every day. Because, as Anique says, in 25 years, it'd be interesting to see what is being talked about and what is important, and the pendulum may swing very much the other way, actually.
And I was being generous with us on the 25 years.
We might be back here, you never know.
Never know.
We hope so, yeah. So one more question from me, and then perhaps we'll open it up to the room. This one amazing thing about Huron, there's, I suspect, lots of great questions in the room, so we'll have a chance to share some of those. So there is so much talk about corporate social responsibility, building more sustainable systems. Tell me a little bit about what that looks like in banking, and maybe for students in the room who are thinking about potentially a big future ahead in this field, what kinds of things should they be thinking about as future leaders trying to build a more inclusive financial system and a more inclusive Canada?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. So really positive things about AI and the things that it can and I'm sure will do, and I'm going to give you an example of a financial institution that's using AI in a quite a meaningful way, is being able to address groups of people who today are either underserved or vulnerable communities in the financial services sector. So, the models and the way that we can serve people will improve through the use of AI. And so let me give you an example to make this somewhat real. Standard Chartered Bank, which is a UK-based financial institution, a very large top 50 bank globally, mostly operate in Asia, where Asia is quite far ahead. Singapore, as an example. Banks in Singapore are quite far advanced in using AI. But Standard Chartered, I'm going to look at my notes because I want to get this right, but they've built an AI algorithm called Social AI, which predicts gender of clients based on public and internal data sets with 90% accuracy. And now they are proactively providing dedicated financing for women entrepreneurs. And this model is now available through the World Bank to over 30 member nations. And the World Bank is trying to close the 1.7 trillion gap that exists because of female entrepreneurs who do not receive enough funding. in the world. Less than 4% in North America of venture capital dollars goes to female entrepreneurs. These numbers are very low, and if you can imagine if these numbers were much increased, that this would increase the world in a much greater way economically across the globe. And Standard Charter is sharing this model to enable better modeling, and that's through the use of AI. But you could think of many different groups that could be afforded the opportunity to get better credit granting if you don't have a credit history, you're new to Canada, you've just moved here, and we could find ways to look through models to create more opportunity for loans, for mortgages. And these are just some of the areas of ways that you could see sustainable finance. You could think about it in ESG side, issuing green bonds as an example, and using models to make sure you're doing that in exactly the right ways. Obviously, you have to have the right oversight and governance on the models, but I think these models will allow a lot greater ways to improve economics and provide more access to financial services through various forms. And I just gave you a few examples there, but I'm excited about how this can be used in a responsible way to advance things in our world.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's great. I'll add a couple of points. You know, when I think about sustainability for our generation, when we went into financial services or large financial organizations, it was very much at the side of the desk. It was very much you had to do it, but it wasn't core to your strategy. It was at the periphery of your strategy. And so you built a strategy around how you were going to serve your clients and how you were going to manage your regulators, and then your sustainability element was overlaid. What I think is changing about this generation is that it's part of the strategy. It's not at the side of the strategy. And so it becomes core to what you do. And when you think about banking and the role that banking plays about who gets funded, like do you get a mortgage or do you not get a mortgage, that determines probably the most important financial decision most people will ever make in that. And then do you get the funding for your business? Are you able to start that small business and that entrepreneurial venture? What I think is different again about this generation is your tolerance for things that were tolerated in different generations, like greenwashing, etc. There is no tolerance for that. You are the ones that call that out. You are the ones that push the envelope of the acceptance of that. And I think the opportunity here is not for this generation to think about how do you work within the constraints, it's how do you redefine those constraints to make this part of the core approach. And that's why I think the Nation Builder program fits so well into this, because it's all about how do you make Canada a better place? How do the jobs that you take and the role that you do makes this country better for all of us to live in? And that's about how do you bring sustainability into the large financial organizations, because they definitely have a role to play. And without that, it's going to be very difficult when you think about the engine of funding into the environment, into the economy, how we hold and manage your deposits, what we do as it relates to, ESG, et cetera. And so I do think that your generation brings a very different lens to that.
Okay, so let's open it up to the room. Who has a question? And for students, if you don't mind, maybe you should start with a bit of an introduction on who you are and what you're studying. And if your question is to one or both panelists, feel free to say so. Lauren Cavern, start us off.
Hi, my name is Lauren.
Sorry.
I'm in governance, leadership and ethics, and animal ethics and sustainable leadership, and I'm lucky enough to be part of the Nation Builder program. I'm just wondering, while we're talking about sustainability, when we look at like ESG frameworks and impact assessments, are we considering, like, do you see a future where we consider AI use as a part of impact assessments and environmental sort of issues? And does the bank, as they're implementing AI into everyday use in your jobs and in like all jobs around different departments, is that being considered? And if it is, how?
Do you want me to start?
Yeah, you go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, when I think about the impact assessment as it relates to ESG, this is a really important point, because I think a lot of times, or for a long time, banks did it because they had to do it. They were regulated and it required them to do it, to put targets and and now in an environment where the US in particular, with their political environment, is moving away from that. One of the things I feel very proud about is Canadian banks not moving away from that. And so owning that we don't make these decisions about putting targets around enterprise ESG type initiatives just because it was the flavor of the month. We did it because we felt it was the right thing to do. Now, what it does do is it allows you to revisit the timing and the sequencing of those targets and how quickly you can achieve them. Or some that, like any target, you might have to change as you go. And so you see a lot of that's what's happening now in financial services. As it relates to AI, it's very much part of that because it goes back to the question around you can use it for good and you can use it for bad. And how you think about that and how you build that into the fabric of how you measure the effectiveness is very much part of large financial institutions and how they're thinking about it. And so some of the ways that we're doing it is putting ethical scores on some of the things that we see coming out of when you're using AI models. So I'll give you an example. We're using it to sort of predict when you're able to a small business and the ability of that small business to fund, right? To be able to make their payment when they get that loan. Or not yet for residential mortgages, but maybe where, is there ability based on your income and your debt service ratios, can you pay that mortgage every month, right? And so that will give you a score that will tell you. But did you really look at that individual? Is that person new to Canada? Has that person, is a first-time entrepreneur? And can you bring a different lens to it that's more than what the AI told you? And so that's where the ethical piece of that has to come into place. So you put the measures in place, but you don't take off the fact that you need to validate that with a bit of a different lens. And particularly, and Gillian mentioned this as well about women funding and making sure, and through what Gillian spearheaded at the Scotia Women's Initiative, there are a lot of women that got funding through that program that they would never have gotten through other financial institutions. And that's where it's to the point where there was no AI, there was no, at that time when you built that. And so that human element about making sure you bring that in will not disappear, even when you think about the advents of these tools that make our day-to-day much easier. A great question.
I'm just going to add one thing because I'm on the board of a bank in the UK, and they are using, the banks are using tools to figure out and help clients with their homes. I mean, a lot of emissions are happening through homes, especially in the UK, which is on an island, and it's very dense. So they have some calculators and tools that the banks actually will use with their clients to give them a green score, and they will actually offer better and different pricing if they're greenifying their home in a meaningful way. So you could see how AI would enable something like that in a more meaningful way. And now that's something Anique can take away to her team because she's running residential mortgages in Canada now at Scotiabank. So that's something I've seen in the UK.
Very cool.
Great question. I promised they'd have good questions, and we'll certainly live up to that. Yes.
Hi, my name's Ella, and I'm in business. And I was wondering, so you spoke about your experience and some of your insights as leaders. I was wondering for us students who, maybe will be sitting on the other side of things, entering into either internship roles or, roles straight out of graduating, if you have any advice for those of us who are kind of sitting on the other end of the table and how we work with different kinds of leaders and conduct ourselves in those settings.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, and hopefully super helpful for everyone. So I think this curiosity piece, not being afraid to ask questions and not being afraid. I find students come into roles when they come in, especially at the bank, they're very excited and they haven't been at the bank, so they don't have any sort of preconceived notions of sort of what they should be doing. And I think that it's important to maintain that and not be afraid to ask questions, especially if you don't know something. Asking questions is really, really important. Asking for good opportunities and new opportunities, not being afraid of that. I say to my kids that have gone to work in different environments, please ask for the help, but also ask for the opportunities. Because people don't automatically think, oh, Gillian is sitting there waiting for something and she has nothing to do, and I don't even know as a leader that she has not much on her plate. So asking for things is important, and be willing to learn. My son is going to work in wealth management, and I've suggested to him that he take maybe the Canadian Securities course or courses that will get him up to speed so that he's really well prepared in his environment. So, and ask for meetings with leaders. Sit down with leaders and say, what are the things I should be bringing? It's just not having that fear of asking. That would be the biggest thing.
That's great. I agree, Ella. That's a great question. And I would maybe add maybe 3 things to that. It's not only about asking questions, but being not afraid to challenge. So if someone's put something in front of you and you disagree, say that. Say that you disagree. And I think about the best interns that I've worked with, and what are some of the things that stood out to me. One is that they would challenge me, and not in a disrespectful way, but it's like, help me understand why this wouldn't work in that situation. Because in some of those instances, I thought that was a better idea, and we pivoted on that. So I'd say that's 1. 2, you are going to have the opportunity with an internship to have access to really interesting people. And I will tell you, I get lots of emails from people that join the bank and say, hey, would you mind meeting for coffee? I always say yes, because I know how hard that was for that person to put themselves out there and take that leap. And so the opportunity to meet people and network, and that says something to me about that individual. Wow, she was willing to take that stretch. Because in your seat 25 years ago, I might have been too nervous to do that, and I wish somebody would have told me that. And I would say the 3rd thing is you will have access and using tools that most people at banks are still far away from. And I'll give you an example of that, where we were talking about fraud and AI fraud. And that was a function that I was running at the time, and the intern that I was working with actually built an AI-generated video using a senior executive at the bank, sent it to me and said, I just want you to see what I could do in half an hour with a really interesting tool. Now think about what this tool in the wrong hands could do for fraud in Canada. It blew my mind, right? And so you have a point of view, you're doing interesting things, you're learning interesting things. Don't be afraid to bring those in. And, those were probably 3 that stood out for me. All 3 got full-time jobs at the bank.
And Gillian, you look like you wanted to add something.
I was, but Bob did not.
Okay. All right. Great question, Ella. Colin.
Well, my name's Colin. I'm a second year at Huron in BMOS. And I just wanted to ask a question to both of you, just sort of about leadership. Just how important do you believe the sort of everyday little actions are for being a leader? Like an action that you might not think about, but could have a huge impact on another person.
I'm happy to go first. That's okay. I think they're absolutely highly the most important things actually that you do. So people notice everything, especially when you're in more senior roles, but in any role leading people, the little things, saying good morning to everyone, walking around, having an open door policy, smiling at people even, asking them about, their weekend or just not getting right into the business thing and being seen as very difficult or tough or scary or whatever. You really need that, create that connection with people, even in the washroom. Wherever it is, that smile, that hello, and remembering about people. I was always lucky. My memory is quite good. I think that's the only thing that's helped me in my life, really, is having a good memory. And so remembering things about people, it goes such a long way, and it makes such a difference. And then that really truly builds that connection and that empathy, I think. I can't stress this point enough.
So maybe, Colin, I'll add to that one. Thank you for calling that out, because I think that's something that both Gillian and I missed in that, is just that element of being kind. And that's a really important element of being a leader. And I have 2 examples that come to mind. One, I think you know Michael Medline, who we did this presentation before. So Michael is on the board at Scotiabank. And my first presentation at Scotiabank, I was terrified. Like, you can imagine your first big presentation, and now this is the presentation to, a board that's overseeing a multi-billion-dollar company. And there was a lunch before the meeting, and so we all sat, and I got invited to the lunch, and I was terrified to go to the lunch too. And I sat next to Michael, and you think about these people as like so important. They're whole on a different level. And he sat down and he said, tell me a little bit about yourself. And he ended up talking about the fact that he played baseball, and his son played baseball, and my son played baseball. And we talked about the fact that, and he just took my temperature down. That by the time I went into that meeting, he felt like a real person. And I thought, well, if he's a real person, everybody else around that table is probably a real person as well. And I went into that meeting just feeling different, and 5 years later, I said that to him. I said, Michael, you probably don't remember that, but it made such a big difference for me. And he was like, I don't even know what you're talking about, because that was just so part of his day-to-day, The second example I will give you is when we announced our new CEO, I was running strategy at the time, and the CEO asked to meet with me. And so the new CEO of the bank, and I'm coming in to meet with him. And so I was prepared, and I had my presentation and my PowerPoint, and I had spent the whole weekend thinking, and I sat down and I said, okay, this is what I think we should do. And he said, whoa, stop. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about, what you do and about your family. And it totally took me off guard, because I thought, what does the CEO of Scotiabank care about me and what I do? Again, it took the temperature down. And I think those are the small acts that you don't realize as a leader when you make, the impact that has on the person. Those things have stayed with me. And something I'm very much conscious of when, I walk into a room and I don't know the people, I always make an effort to go and introduce myself. And I look for that person that looked like me 5 years ago, who I'm sure Michael knew that I was terrified. I'm sure he looked for that spot. And I try to do that, because that's the responsibility when someone does that for you, that you make sure that you do that go forward.
Artem.
Thank you so much. My name is Artem. I'm studying BMOS Business Intelligence here at Huron. My French studies was in here with my research. I really love the part of the work talk about expanding the access to financial resources to some people that typically lack them. And I was wondering, with the AI helping to make those decisions, part of my thinking goes back to the political economy course that I took last year, and there in the class we had a conversation about 2008 financial crisis and how we relied so much on the mathematical models to predict everything. With the AI going in and with all the excitement about it, and obviously all the great opportunities that it brings, I was wondering, how do you approach, well, I guess you could say, if management of risks with its application, so that's really this, pardon my French, full practical.
It's a great question. Thank you. I think that the AI models will be far more robust than what was around in 2008 and 2009. As I said earlier, the number of black swan events that have occurred in recent history are much greater than there was ever before in the last 200 years prior to that. And so I do think academia, like here, and others, are and companies are building models to be able to look out at future black swan events with, again, more accuracy, more robustness, and the impact of AI on that will be greater than it was in 08, 09 to be able to predict these outcomes and what they look like. And I'm certain people are modeling different outcomes in scenario. I will pick climate change as an easy one. You can think about events that might occur, weather-related or otherwise, that this would be, if I was an insurance company, I would be running models to figure out the impact so that I could price premiums appropriately to manage through that risk as it comes. And if people aren't thinking that way, that they will be needing to, because we just don't know. Who knew that COVID was going to be a pandemic that was going to come the way that it came? And so and you don't know, you can't predict everything, but I do think AI will help us understand these and forecast these better than we have in the past.
Yeah, I agree with Gillian, other than I would say that models are never going to predict everything, right? And if you think about some of these events, just a month ago, we wouldn't have been predicting where we are right now from a geopolitical position, and what that means for the price at the pump, and what that means for income stability in Canada. So there's always going to be technology that's going to be evolving and thinking about how do you predict, and that's good, and you should always do that. But as students, what I think you need to take away from that is, how do you manage through those crises? What do you actually do when that situation happens? How do you lead your teams through that? What role that you play? Because in all of those crises, and I've been working in financial services for more than 20 years now, and if I had $1 for every time somebody said, this is unprecedented, I wouldn't need to work anymore, right? Because every crisis feels like it's unprecedented. And guess what? We've worked our way through all of those crises, Y2K, and what happened in 2028, and all of and this is, so it's not about predicting the crisis. It is about how do you find the way that you manage through that crisis and that you learn something from that. So when you come out of that, you're better prepared for the next one.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question, and then I do want to give you the final word. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your insights and advice. My name is Ksenia. I'm a fourth-year business intelligence student at Huron. And I have a question specifically for Anique and also Gillian. So for Anique, based on a lot of the trends that you guys talked about in lending, what is the future of lending? For Gillian, I think more specifically for you would be like you talked about the trends within banking, not even just in Canada, but also in the UK. So what are the future of banking? And how would you, us, as the people that would be working in that future or managing that future, what advice do you have for us or things to look out for?
Oh, that's a big question. That's a hard one. That's a hard one to end
Told you
on.
they don't disappoint.
How long do you have?
No, exactly. We could be here. So I'll try to do that quick. And I'm going to start with the second part of the question first. What advice do I have for you? There are a couple of things. Be curious. Consistent learning. Don't worry so much about what the, I don't worry so much about the grade as worry as much about the learning. I don't always say that, but the grades are important too. But it's about making sure that you're curious, that you're constantly learning, that you're willing to take risks, that you're being courageous in the career choices that you take. Because when I was sitting where you were all those years ago, if you had told me that this is where I would be in my career now, I would have said absolutely not possible. Right? And so your career is going to take multiple paths. And sometimes that's lateral moves, steps back. And don't get fussed about the path of which you're going. Don't get fussed about the title, particularly in the first couple of years. It's more about who you work for, what you're doing, and what you're learning. I think those are the important things. And that's what I'd be thinking about, particularly as a fourth year, going into the real world environment next year. In terms of some of the trends that I think that we're going to see in lending, there are a couple of things that I do think they're important. The role of AI in that is playing a much bigger role now. And so thinking about how do you get underserved communities into that lending environment and being able to use tools and help predict that is really important. And I think that's some of the trends that we're certainly seeing on that. I also think that being able to find segments of the population where there's opportunities to enhance the quality of the products that you're serving them with. That's probably another, like Gillian talked about, Scotia Women's Initiative, etc. Third is on the products. I actually think the kind of lending products that we see now are going to be different than what we see 10 years from now. It might not just be a mortgage that you have for 25 years. There might be a very different and unique way to do that because of the advent of things like digital currencies and stable coins and being able to use blockchain. That's going to revolutionize the way that we think about holding deposits and the way that we think about payments, which by definition will change how we think about lending. So all of those things I think are very front and foremost as I think about the future of lending.
So I have to remember the question, but here's one thing that we've talked a lot about today is there's a lot of change and there will continue to be a lot of change. I think change is a constant. And so this being comfortable, being uncomfortable, thinking and mindset will be really important. Having a growth mindset and finding the ways that you can continue to grow in whatever environment and whatever career path you choose, but thinking about that, how do I grow that? If it's in financial services, yes, AI is going to do all kinds of things. It's going to change how we interact with the bank. It's going to change how the bank offers products and services. There's, digital assets, there's blockchain, there's, all kinds of different things that are coming. There's different entrants, different players, technology, Apple Pay. All of these things are changing, but at the heart of it, there's always a customer. And this customer-centric innovation is something I've always been guided by, finding ways to add value, using technology, working with people, finding that way to differentiate and make a difference. Using technology or working with people, I think, will be a game changer. So yes, there's a lot of emerging things and there's a lot of change coming. Being comfortable with that, but finding ways to add value in this changing dynamic. I think if I was sitting in your chair, that's what I would be looking towards doing. And I don't know if some of you are thinking about startups or fintechs or, there's lots of different career paths today, which I think are really interesting. And I think Canada needs more people thinking about how they innovate and build out this innovation stream in our country and build it in Canada. So look forward to see what's coming, because it's a complex world for sure.
Okay, great. And thank you for the good questions to the students in the room. I always like to give the speakers just a chance for a final word. You've given us big insights, rich ideas, lots of very practical things, but is there one final thing that each of you would like to leave with us today before we say thank you?
I'm going to leave one thought.
One thought, okay.
Your network is your net worth. Okay, we're going to repeat that. Your network is your net worth. Have a network, know people, have sponsors, have mentors. These people are going to be important for you. And these are the people that are going to help you when you fall down. These are the people that are going to help you to get ahead. They're going to give you very, very wise advice, and keep them close, because I think that's going to be a way to really expand how you think about things. That's how you're going to get feedback. That's how you're going to get opportunities. So I'll just repeat it. I like this one. Your network is your net worth. So spend time on that.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's been great. And I can say that I feel very privileged to be in Gillian's network. So
definitely. I too.
My only piece of advice that I would say to you is don't also underestimate, when you think about your network, of the people in this room that are with you now. As I think about my career journey and where I am, a lot of the people that were in this first year room or second year with me now are still my network and my contacts. And so you always think sometimes about sponsors and mentors that are people that are more senior to you. Remember that contact list grows with you, and those are very important relationships that I take with me now. I would say maybe the only other thing that I wish someone had said to me when I was sitting in your seat is don't be afraid to take risks. And sometimes you, particularly women, have to be pushed to take risks. And you don't feel always prepared. Every time I get I'm hiring for an intern, and I'm interviewing the men, many times they're not as prepared, yet they feel that they can take the job. And they do a good job when they get it, but they don't necessarily have the capabilities. And when I look at the women's resumes, if they're in there, they feel that they tick every box. And so sometimes, particularly for the women in the room, don't be afraid to take risks, and don't underestimate that you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. I worked through the ugly sweater. You will figure it out. And so make sure that you take those risks and you put yourself out there to give yourself the same opportunities.
Fabulous, great. Well, thank you very much to both of you. Yes, the room wants to applaud, and I would wholeheartedly agree. So I would like to welcome to the stage the amazing Ilia Bortolussi to bring thanks. But let me just, as she's coming up to the microphone, just thank you very much for your generosity of time, of insight, of expertise today. We have learned a lot from you, and I'll turn it to Ilia.
Hi everyone, my name is Elia. I'm a second-year BMOS student in the Nation Builder program, and I just wanted to take a moment to thank both of you for coming in and speaking with us today on behalf of the Nation Builder program and all of our guests here today. Both of your conversations were so impactful and insightful, not just for me, but I know for everybody in the audience, and hearing about the experience you both have experienced throughout the entirety of your career, which ultimately led to your success, brought so much valuable insight and perspective. Anique, the way you spoke about navigating challenges in your career, especially in spaces where you felt out of place and a little bit unprepared, but you were able to overcome them to become the woman you are today, really stood out to me, as I know a lot of young professionals in this room will experience the exact same thing throughout their career. And Gillian, hearing your perspective and your philosophy on leadership, focusing on that integrity, resilience, and communication part was extremely touching for me, and the way you've been able to navigate your career and adapted with the industry, especially with things like AI that are constantly changing, and there's definitely things that we're going to have to change with as well, speaks to the importance of confidence in your abilities and passion for what you do. On a personal level, as a woman aspiring to break into finance, hearing both of your journeys was so inspiring, and it felt like the perfect way to end our Spark Series events for the academic year. So thank you again so much for your time. And audience, if you can please join us in the Medline Student Commons for a reception and further opportunity to connect with Gillian and Anique.